Well, Governor Burgum, thank you for joining us today.
Oliver, fantastic. Thrilled to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I had this big list of introductory questions, but in light of recent events as early as this morning, I think it would be pertinent for us to talk about the attack on Israel. And I know you've been listening to it and been following it throughout your day. What do you think the U.S. response should be? How would you respond to that as president?
Well, I have to go back a step further because as your president, I'd like to think these attacks wouldn't be happening in the first place. But before I talk about that, I just have to say again, your hearts have to go out. I mean, it's sometimes when these seem like faraway places, and it just seems like a headline in the news. But I mean, imagine if a community in the United States this morning and then woke up and thousands of rockets were raining down on civilians and killing and injuring now untold people. I'm sure the count will continue to go up, but each one of those people is died or injured, son, daughter, mom, dad, niece, nephew, and it's just heartbreaking. So again, prayers out to all of the people that are suffering from this loss. But and the other response I have is, in addition to empathy, is anger, because when I see the Biden administration cutting what's basically a secret nuclear deal, which is against the law to do. I mean, in 2015, Congress passed a law that said no administration, either party, can help Iran move back to the nuclear deal that was signed during the Obama administration originally, that can't happen without approval of Congress. And then here we have, disguised as a hostage exchange. I mean, when you're exchanging 5 hostages for 5 hostages, then why are we releasing $6 billion of assets? Is that the world's worst negotiation? For a country, Iran, that is the world's largest supporter of terrorism. And when they've got $6 billion more in assets, freed up by the Biden administration, and they support Hamas, they support Hezbollah, they support Islamic Jihad. I mean, all of these terrorist organizations look to Iran for their directions. Iran has been cheering them on today in the press, supporting what they're doing. And so we're already in a Cold War with China, we're in a proxy war with Russia, and now we've opened up essentially another front of conflict where people are dying because we have an administration that's pursuing a Neville Chamberlain approach to diplomacy, which is appeasement. I mean, appeasing Iran encourages more terrorism attacks like you're seeing today. And we know that Neville Chamberlain thought he could do that pre-World War II, and we know what happened. We ended up with 500,000 Americans dying in conflict supporting our allies around the world. And my dad was one of those that served in World War II. He made it through World War II in the U.S. Navy as a sailor. But it's just sad to see that we can't learn from history, and people are dying because we don't understand what strength through peace actually means anymore.
And so what are the logical next steps for the U.S.?
Well, I think we've always, people complain about, some people even in our own Republican Party complain about the amount of money that we spend supporting allies. But, one of the great bargains is that I think Israel, our support is like $3.6 billion. I mean, this is, it's real money, but it's also relative to all the waste in government, relative to the trillions spent on these, the pursuit of these, green energy policies, which aren't making the planet greener or safer or helping the environment or reducing CO2. This is a small investment to make in a democracy that is one of America's strongest allies. And we're together, competing against regimes like Iran that are, get up every day, and those regimes, death to America and death to Israel. And it's we need to support our allies. We need to help them make sure they have defense. And again, part of what I'm sure Iran and Hamas is after is that we were very close to normalizing relations for the first time in my lifetime between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And if we can get other partners in the Middle East as they move towards normalizing relationships, I thought we could actually deconflict some of the things that are going on in the Middle East. But Iran doesn't want that to happen. They don't want to see. They want to see conflict, and so they're going to continue to support terrorist groups.
For sure. What do you think about the timing of the exchange and the billions we gave them and this attack? Is there a correlation.
Well, I certainly, I mean, if your balance sheet just went up by $6 billion, you probably feel like, hey, I'm in a better position to send money to support terrorism. But, part of the timing, of course, again, nearing the end of a Jewish holiday, and, it's just the timing of the attack is, again, it's abhorrent, and people that are willing to, launch rockets into civilian populations. I mean, I don't know. You call it war or you call it evil. I don't know how you think about it, but it's horrible to think about it. And I think most Americans would have a hard time understanding. We'd have a very different response if a city in America was being attacked by a terrorist organization today, because we'd be like, wow, it's 9/11 all over. We'd be having that kind of response as opposed to, hey, who's playing football this afternoon?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is a terrible event and a tragedy, and that's why I wanted to start with that. I just thought it was really pertinent. And I want to ask you some other questions too about your personal life and about your journey to the presidency. How has your upbringing in North Dakota shaped your worldview and your approach to leadership? I mean, you're from a different place than most of your opponents are. North Dakota. How's that shaped you? And
yeah, well, absolutely. Well, the rest of the field in both parties is pinned pretty close to the East Coast on this thing, and it's I grew up in the heartland, grew up in a small town, Arthur, North Dakota, 300 people, and I think anybody in Iowa or around the country understands what that's all about, because when you grow up in a small town, it's about accountability, it's about transparency. Everybody knows where you are, what you're doing. They know whether you paid your bills on time. They know whether you made it to work or not. And so it's just, you don't know anything different, but you just understand that it's about integrity and trust. And growing up there, working on the farm, working on the ranch, working at the grain elevator, even working it as a chimney sweep to pay my way through college. Every job I had was one where you took a shower at the end of the day. So I think I understand a lot about what hardworking Americans are going through as they're facing inflation and economic insecurity. And then, as I mentioned, my dad, I learned from him, sacrifice and service. When Pearl Harbor happened, he was single. He went down the road to Castle, North Dakota, went to the gym and signed up for the Navy, and never had seen the ocean, didn't know how to swim. There's no pool in Arthur, the town I grew up in. When I was there, it was gravel streets. He had a college degree, and they said, great, you're going to be a naval officer. 90 days, they called them the 90-day wonders. They'd punch them through and go to the Great Lakes Naval Training Station in Milwaukee and run you through naval officer training, and away you go. As fast as we were building destroyers, then he's assigned to a destroyer. And in between when he enlisted and when he got on the destroyer, he proposed to mom, got married to mom, and then they didn't see her till the end of the war. And he's one of the lucky ones that made it through. There was half of the nation's MIAs since the beginning of our country, since 1776. Half of the 80,000 missing in action are World War II Navy sailors whose ships went down. And at Okinawa, 151 destroyers, they're the picket fence protecting the aircraft carriers. 129 were hit by kamikazes. So it's only by the grace of God I'm even sitting here talking to you, Oliver. Wow. And but he made it all the way through to September 2nd, 1945. USS Wren, his destroyer, is across from the USS Missouri when MacArthur's accepting the complete and total surrender of a totalitarian military regime. And so my dad made it home. He lived to tell about it. But it's and then what did we do as a country? Best of America. We took that regime, helped them write a constitution, turned it into one of the world's strongest democracies, became the second largest economy in the world, one of our biggest allies. From what was one of our enemies, but we weren't an enemy of the people. We were the enemy of the regime, and that's we have to understand still that those lessons apply today. But he came back to Arthur, and they raised a family, 3 kids, and life was fantastic. And with him and my mom was also amazing. And then my dad died when I was a freshman in high school. My mom, widow, 3 kids. Going back to work, I understand what economic insecurity is. I understand, she's got to get a job, put food on the table, and pay the bills. And I saw her. She lived 34 more years after my dad passed away, and was her perseverance, her grace, her curiosity were all. I couldn't have asked for 2 better parents than I had. It was a gift.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's. It sounds like your town was a lot like the town I grew up in, Winterset, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a little farming community. And my dad was a Marine, Korean War veteran.
Oh,
He passed away when I was 19, and my mom lived on
oh,
quite a few years and worked. And similar story, interesting. Although I didn't become governor of Iowa. But
right. Well, but it's that shared experience. I mean, any of us has lost a parent as a teenager.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
something that it really alters your life
Yeah,
course.
for sure. In moments of doubt and challenge, what philosophical or moral principles guide your decisions?
Well, I think the thing that we all understand, and I understand, I mean, just with the story about my dad and understanding the faith that my mother had, which is, there's a higher power out there that is, that we all have to turn to at times and understand and have faith that there's a power there greater than all of us. I mean, you look at the universe that we live in with awe and wonder and say, wow, this is an amazing place and every day is a gift. I mean, one thing I learned from my dad dying so young is that you have to approach every day with gratitude, because every day is a gift, and we have an opportunity to use that day to make a difference in other people's lives is one of the things we can do, and it's motivated me ever since I was a kid, which is life is short, you better make it count.
Right, I don't think most people realize that when they're young.
Yeah.
It takes a while. How has your experience as a software developer influenced your perspective on the rapid advancements in AI and machine learning? I mean, that's all the discussions right now. You turn on Joe Rogan or Lex Fridman, they're talking about AI, and it's just, I'm surprised that more people don't know about how far it's come. How can you speak to that and how it's going to change our world right now?
Well, absolutely I can, and I thrilled that you asked the question, Oliver, because people aren't talking about it enough, and people are underestimating the change that's coming. And of course, in my lifetime, again, you grew up in a small town. There was no computer in Arthur when I was growing up, and there wasn't a PC when I was going to North Dakota State. My computer class I took there was punch cards on a mainframe because the university was 10 years behind. So it was, you had 1960s technology, going on in the 1970s. But when I saw my first Apple II computer with VisiCalc, that's when I said, hey, 160 acres of farm ground from my dad as the only asset I had. And I'm like, hey, I'm literally going to bet the farm because that's going to change the world. And it turns out that software has been the greatest invention to expand, human capability since the beginning of mankind. I mean, there's a lot of things like the wheel, levers. I mean, there's the compass. I mean, those are things that accurate clocks that solve longitude. I mean, there's been big breakthroughs in technology, but software directly amplifies human capability, and it's one of the reasons why in the last just over 20 years, 1 billion people on our planet have risen out of poverty around the world because of free markets. Free enterprise, democracy is supported by the United States, combined with a technology that largely has come from the U.S. I mean, we're transforming people's lives around the world, whether we get credit for it or not, because we had the free market system and the innovation that occurred here. And now those advances have happened. I was a farm kid that ended up in the software business, was involved in dozens of different software companies after the original one that we built. One of those was a company that was Atlassian, as if you were from the planet Atlas, you would be an Atlassian. And the whole point of that was to build tools to help people write better software faster, to accelerate this positive change. Understanding that every company, if you're a car company, that car is filled with software. If you're John Deere, that tractor is filled with software. If you've got a refrigerator now, it's got software. Your phone, wow, there's more software and more computing power on a smartphone today than in the whole NASA program had. Not just what was on the moon lander, but what the whole NASA program had. One phone's got more, memory and storage and computing power than the whole NASA program did in 1967. So it's just hard to comprehend the power that's there. And now you bring along machine learning and AI, and the amplification is just going to accelerate. And the opportunity we have, even in government, when we finish the legislative session this year in North Dakota, I am confident that the only governor in the United States that when the session got done said we're having a 2-day offsite with our 24 cabinet leaders and the whole topic is going to be AI. Because hey, agency leaders, you may not have gotten all the FTE and headcount that you asked for in the budget this year, but guess what? There's a free tool that speaks 26 languages and can code and can write a draft of any report you have that you might be interested in, and it's in every single member of your agency can have that co-pilot sitting next to them, and guess what? They're free and they don't need benefits, they don't need lunch breaks, and they're available wherever you are. I mean, you're in the office, out of the office, at home, late at night, you've got this power to do this stuff, and to understand how we can increase productivity and how that can be a competitive advantage for the United States, it's unbelievable. And specifically against China right now, I mean, when China's got 1.4 billion people, if China's got, in rural areas, third world economy, and if you got 100 people digging ditches, you don't even want a Bobcat skid steer loader because it would displace 100 jobs of people with shovels. In America, it's the exact opposite. We've got 10 million jobs open in our country. China's got record unemployment between 18 and 24-year-olds. They literally could topple the whole country if unemployment got worse. I mean, if there was like the workers' rebellion. Here, we've got an opportunity to apply AI to things like government, like healthcare, like a bunch of stuff, deliver better healthcare at a lower cost. Wouldn't that be amazing? How about better education at lower cost? How about better government at a lower cost? How about creating more meaningful jobs for everyone? And so I'm an optimist when I see this, because when people paint all these horrible pictures, guess what? Go read a story from 1900 when the tractor was being introduced, and what are we going to do with all these ag workers and the harness makers and the people that that shoe the horses? I mean, what are you going to do with all of them? Well, guess what? We've had the greatest gains of productivity in the ag sector compared to any other sector in our economy in the last 100 years. And guess what? When I was a kid, we were going to run out of food and the world was going to starve. And guess what? Now we have the capability to feed a planet. And when nutrition goes up, size of family goes down, problem solved. I mean, we are not running into the problems that people predicted, and the AI will not create some of the problems that people are predicting now. This could actually lift humanity to levels that were prior unimaginable.
How do you see AI affecting agriculture, for instance?
Well, there's so many ways that it can accelerate research, and whether it's for advances to solve entire disease classes, but in agriculture, one of the things again is, how do we get things that grow faster and grow better and grow smarter and grow in greenhouses or grow in CO2 enhanced thing, because we've solved a lot of problems in terms of production, but I can tell you in North Dakota, if you want to go buy blueberries in January, they probably were raised in Chile, and then we spent a bunch of energy shipping them, across 2 continents to get there. And then what's the quality versus, what could you be growing year round in CO2 enhanced things and CO2 enhanced greenhouses with low energy thing. I mean, so agriculture's got a huge opportunity for innovation where we can, raise local, eat local, people can be healthier, you can do all that stuff. And at the same time, we're still, got successful mass agriculture that's feeding the world and fueling the world. So I get excited, but again, this goes back to a country where our future has to be built around innovation, not regulation, because the regulation that's being poured on by non-elected bureaucrats in Washington is coming at a rate which no citizen understands. The way you understand that is if you're the governor of an ag and energy state, you're at the tip of the spear. Right now we're fighting 20 different initiatives by the Biden administration, like 4 from U.S. and Fish and Wildlife, a bunch from the Bureau of Land Management, EPA, the list is as long as my arm. And these aren't like, oh, here's one, when they say the rule, we're releasing a new rule, the rule singular might be 800 pages, and it's actually hundreds of rules, and they're written by people that may have never set foot in a place like Iowa. But they're going to try to say, we care more about the land and the water and the soil health and the air quality than you do. Of course not, because not when you've got states like Iowa where the majority of the land is owned by farmers and ranchers that are 5th, 6th, 7th generation. Nobody cares about more of that, not some bureaucrat writing some rules. And one size fits all, those 800-page rules apply to America. Right. Every time zone, from Hawaii to Maine, and then every latitude, from the tip of Florida, subtropical up to the tip of Alaska. You can't design one size fits all for the geographic and diversity that we have here. So
How will you clean that up?
It's got to move it back to the states. It's got to go to the states. We all have EPA departments. We've all got departments of environmental quality. We all have people that care about all this stuff. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's being done that was never even part of the original charter of the EPA. And it certainly wasn't part of the federal government. I mean, go to the 10th Amendment, 28 words. The states delegate these powers to the federal government. And you delegated to the federal government? Yeah, by who? The states, the original 13 states. And then it says, and the rest are reserved for the states, comma, or for the people. It doesn't say, oh, the federal government's got unlimited power to make rules about everything. The overreach is nonstop. It raises the price of everything we eat, every product you buy, the fuel in your car, the electricity for your home. All of that is overpriced because of the federal regulation.
Is there a clear path to returning that power to the states?
Well, I think you have to have the leadership and the will, but part of it is you got to get people out of D.C. And I give credit to Ryan Zinke. He actually got part of the Bureau of Land Management to move to Western Colorado. They fought it tooth and nail. Guess what? There's no federal land in the eastern part of the U.S. I'm not talking about national parks. I'm talking about the land that Theodore Roosevelt, 240 million acres across U.S. Forest Service, U.S. grasslands, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, 240 million acres were put away for the benefit and the use of the American people. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to put it away and never set foot on it because it's a preserve. No, it was a balance sheet where if we sustainably developed cut a tree, planted 2 new ones, develop minerals, then we could maybe have uranium here for nuclear. We could have critical minerals for batteries here, as opposed to outsourcing our future to the world's largest polluter, China. So this idea that somehow we're saving the planet by not letting anybody set foot on federal lands, it's almost like Americans believe that federal lands shouldn't have any commercial activity on them. That is so far from the original purpose. The original purpose was this was an asset for all of us. The citizens own the federal land, not an unelected bureaucrat that's writing. They don't own the federal land. Joe Biden does not own 240 million acres of federal land. We do. The people own it. And if you want to say, hey, I'm going to pay more for everything I have, we're going to destabilize the world, we're going to empower dictators around the world because we're not using our land. I think if it was up to every citizen, they'd be like, maybe we should do it because we do it cleaner, better, and safer than anyone else in the world. The U.S. has taken more CO2 out of the air than any other country. And you know who did that? Who led the way? The U.S. energy industry. The one that the Biden administration is trying to kill is actually the group that's taken the most CO2 out.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I know there's some debate about the CO2 pipeline, and there are some Iowans that aren't excited about it. Could you explain it a little better and how it will benefit and what the details are or what your perspective is on it?
Well, Iowans can have to work it out locally on their pipeline, but I'll just tell you the history of North Dakota. I mean, we've had CO2 pipelines for 22 years operating safely. There's never been a death from a CO2 pipeline. We kill 45,000 people a year on roads in America. I mean, it's more people die of lightning strikes every year and shark attacks than we've ever had from a CO2 pipeline. And pipeline, CO2 is non-explosive. In North Dakota, we know about pipelines. We've got the Bakken. We've got tens of thousands of miles of pipeline that's gone in just in the last 13 years, all crisscrossing the northwestern part of the state. It's got refined product. It's got, production salt water that comes out of the wells. It's got the natural gas products and the flared gas that are coming off of these things that we're gathering the gas with before they go to a gas processing plant. So we have pipelines of all kinds, whatever, but we also in the mix, we've got CO2. And we've got one CO2 pipeline that's moved 42 million tons of CO2 from North Dakota to Canada for enhanced oil recovery. We built a new one, not we.
How do they use that in enhanced oil recovery?
You compress it, it's a liquid, you put it down hole, and when it goes down hole, it stays down hole, but more oil and gas comes up. Okay. And so then on a net basis, like Denbury, which is a company that operates in southwestern North Dakota, they built a 105-mile pipeline from ExxonMobil gas plant in Wyoming, so they capture all the CO2 off of that, comes through Wyoming, Montana, into North Dakota. They put it down some 1980s wells that were having, depleted production. They inject the CO2 in the ground into that oil field, oil coming up now approaching its original levels of productivity without having to drill a new well. So super good for the environment, good for cost, good for whatever. And they put about 1,700 pounds of CO2 down, and a barrel of oil comes up, produces 500 pounds less than that. So they're greener than Patagonia using the same formula. They've got a net negative barrel of oil. So guess what, America? You don't have to get rid of your internal combustion machine. If you want to drive your car and your pickup and you care about the environment, then do it with low carbon intensive fuels. And of course, Iowa, it stands to benefit the most of any state from this technology, because Iowa produces more ethanol than any other state in the nation, one of the world's largest producers, and it's way easier than taking CO2 off of a coal plant. The easiest thing in the world is taking CO2 off an ethanol plant, because when you cook that corn, it's like a Kentucky still it's basically you're making alcohol, you're cooking it up, and you get alcohol, the ethanol.
I think my great-granddad had one of those
stills.
You get the
alcohol, and then you get CO2, and you capture the CO2, and it's like 99% pure CO2. It could be used for industrial purposes, enhanced oil recovery, could be used for advanced materials down the road. And it turns out in North Dakota, we've got the world's perfect storage capability for CO2, so you can we'll take any CO2 that people want to ship us. We've permitted over 250 million tons of storage, and we've defined in law that the landowners own that pore space. And so the farmers and ranchers that own the land, we permitted one last week that's 51 square miles, and close to 90% of the landowners agreed in that area that said, hey, I'd like to get a mailbox check for storing CO2. Underground, a mile underground between two hard, shale layers. So it goes down, it stays down there. If you needed to retrieve it down the road, we could do that and use it for other advanced stuff. I mean, at our Environmental and Energy Research Center, they're doing work on carbon fibers. They've got a fiber that's the thickness of a human hair, and it can lift a piano. I mean, you could end up replacing concrete roads with carbon-based materials. Because every kid that's bought a bicycle and goes, well, there's A and there's B, and this one's lighter and faster and stronger. What's it made of? It's made of carbon fiber.
Oh, right.
So it's like, carbon is not. You've got some people convinced that carbon is the devil element on the periodic table, and we should marshal our resources in an existential crisis against it, when it's actually.
So that leads me to. I was rewatching the debates this morning in preparation for this interview, and during the debates, you mentioned the Detroit. Well, they were talking about the Detroit strike, and you criticized Biden's $1 billion subsidy of electric cars.
Trillion, I should have said.
Or trillion, okay. Yeah. And you talked about the environmental impact of producing the cars, especially the components being made overseas. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Well, you only had like a minute.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, so it's like
I'll give you more than that.
Thank you. Thank you. You want to cut my mic off?
Right.
Biden goes up to Detroit to walk stand with the people that are striking. It's a great photo op. You build an EV car with a Chinese battery, you need about 2/3 less workers than building internal combustion. As we were just talking about in the previous segment, there's a way to decarbonize liquid fuels, and we need liquid fuels for things like sustainable aviation, because nobody's getting on a battery operated plane anytime soon to fly across the Pacific, because the weight of the batteries would be the whole cargo load. Maybe you'd get on a plane someday if every seat was filled with 250 pounds of batteries and you were the only passenger, but you wouldn't get on one where like the weight ratio of the gas that is in the wings, which then actually lowers from the weight when you take off in a plane to the weight when you land. Sometimes the fuel is equal to the weight of the plane. So when it lands, there's way less structural impact on the plane. So there's just not physics a way to say we're going to load this thing up and it's going to weigh as much when it takes off as when it lands, and the batteries are there, and batteries aren't operating on Moore's law. Moore's law is that you double in power at half the price every 18 months. That's been going on my entire time I've been in the tech world, And batteries get better at about 2% a year. So I mean, you can sort of, they're not compounding, they're not on a logarithmic scale, they're just inching up. And there's some new advances and they're doing some things, but to get to some of those advances, you got to have rare earth minerals and critical minerals. And the reason they call them rare earth is because they're measured in parts per million. So you've got to move millions of pounds to get enough material. I mean, it's in some of the materials that in these Chinese-made batteries, they're moving 100,000 to 500,000 pounds of earth to get enough to do one battery. So the mining operations are massive, and you're moving all this dirt, but in that dirt, there's these parts per million that you can get at. So any idea that someone thinks that they're saving the planet by driving an EV with a Chinese battery in it is like, hey, take a trip and look at the child labor in Africa. Look at Indonesia getting destroyed by Chinese companies that are out there. Well, there's no EPA. They're just open pit mining. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that disgusted everybody here in a century ago that we said we've got to stop doing that in America. But now we know how to mine sustainably and smartly. I mean, we can do this here. We've got rules that would do it, and it would be the right thing to do. So I just think it's just crazy to think that we've fought all these wars going back to World War II over energy. OPEC has been a big part of that power battle, and that somehow when we finally have energy independence, and now we've got energy dominance, all because of the shale revolution. It's all changed in the last 15 years. Is that the innovation that allowed the places like the Bakken in North Dakota, where you go down 2 miles, turn a corner you drill down 2 miles, turn the corner, and then go 2 miles sideways. That's a typical Bakken well. That 2 miles sideways, that horizontal lateral, is in a 30 feet of shale. They stay inside of it for 2 miles. It's less than 1/3 of 1% tolerance. I was in a drill shack with a young man, and I said, a petroleum engineer, I said, how do you stay in? How do you guide? Now you're 4 miles away from where we're standing. How do you make sure you stay inside that 30-foot strip of shale where all this oil is coming from? And he said, sir, if your house was 2 miles down and 2 miles over, I could drill the lockout on the front door. Wow. I mean, that's technology. That's innovation. That is what has allowed us to become energy independent. Now we have a chance to become energy dominant, which means we can provide it for ourselves and sell it to all of our allies. China imports more oil and gas than anybody else in the world. It's the one club we have in a negotiation in a Cold War with them. And we've had 4 members of the Biden administration there this year. None of them have talked to China about energy. They're too busy trying to shut it down right here. And so you asked about the strike. The strike is, they're striking not because they want higher wages. Of course they want higher wages, because under Biden, if prices are up about 30%, the average family is paying $700 more a month just for the food on the table and the gas in their car, and most people haven't gotten an $8,400 raise in the last 2 years. And so then they're losing their real income, and their savings are being eroded by the Biden inflation. So of course we're going to have more strikes because people are saying this is not fair. Prices are going up and my wages aren't. But what they're really striking about on the UEA is like, hey, our jobs are going away because basically if you want a battery, we're shipping the jobs to China. That's what's happening.
So is there a way to pull that back? You talked about all the land that we have and the technology. Could we safely mine those minerals here?
Yeah, absolutely we could. But we could mine those, and we could mine uranium for nuclear, because nuclear could be clean baseload power. Nobody's ever died from a nuclear plant in America, but somehow we've demonized that industry as well. And then Biden creates another monument which covered, I mean, great, we want to protect historic indigenous land, great, but then don't make the monument so big that it also covers up some of the richest uranium deposits in the United States. Because you know who we get our uranium from? Russia. Oh. Russia is importing uranium today to the United States for us to run our existing 93 nuclear plants that we have in the country today. We get it from Russia. Talk about a vulnerable supply chain.
So as president, you would clean that up and make it so we could mine it here?
Well, I would just say, let's start from a principle, which is we're going to provide energy for ourselves and to our allies. And to do that across all of the above strategies, how do we do that? If we're going to have solar panels, how do we make sure that the solar panels aren't made in China in a plant powered by coal? Because China is building a coal plant right now, 1 a week. That seems incredible. 2 years ago, it was 2 a month. Now they're down to 1 a week. Why would they do that? They would do that because they have parts of their country that don't even have electricity yet. And we're not going to tell them, oh, don't put CO2 in the air when they've got 100 million people that don't have electricity. They're going to keep building plants until everybody's got electricity, right? I mean, 100 million is like 25 Iowas. They're like 25 Iowas worth of population that don't have electricity. And when they're building these coal plants, they're not building U.S. leading technology like we have in North Dakota, where we can decarbonize the base load, take out all the, the sulfur oxides, the nitric oxides, the CO2. We can do all that and have clean, sustainable base load, which is all possible here through innovation. No, they're building 1970 style coal plants. And why would they do that? They would do that. And then the Washington Post writes this amazing article about how incredible, last week, about how incredible China is because they're ahead of the U.S. in converting from internal combustion to electric vehicles.
Well, while they're polluting the planet.
Yeah, they're the biggest polluter, and they're powering all those electric vehicles by coal. And why would they do that? They would do that because they don't want to be dependent on Russian oil. They don't want to be dependent on Middle East oil, and they don't have any oil. So they're trying to reduce their oil consumption by going electric and fueling all their cars by coal. They have a very different strategic objective than they do, and it has nothing to do with reducing CO2 emissions.
So
They're going up, U.S. is going down.
So why is nuclear energy so much cleaner, and why has it been so demonized?
Well, it's crazy, but it's pop culture. I mean, two things. I mean, Chernobyl happened, that's bad. Fukushima happened, tidal wave, that's bad. And then, but Jane Fonda, the China Syndrome movie in the 1980s scared everybody to death. And then we had the 3 Mile, Isle incident in Pennsylvania, which nobody died from, but everybody got terrified about this thing. But now, guess what? That was closing on 40 years ago, just like every other industry. I mean, think where we've come in software and technology and monitoring and all the things that can happen that we can build. And you can build now these small plants. You don't have to build a plant that's 1,000 megawatt. They're building one in Wyoming, and they're doing some there on these modular ones. They're going to be, 10 megawatt plant for a nuclear plant with almost no waste. Well, you could put that in a remote Alaskan village that we could never get a power line to. You could put it at a military base someplace. I mean, there's all kinds of uses, to intermix nuclear in there. And if people that are in love with, it's weird, the people that are in love with the intermittent, the wind and the solar, somehow are opposed to nuclear, when nuclear would be an offset to that intermittent. And of course, we've got other countries, even using the 1980s technology, have figured out a way to have most of their electricity from nuclear and don't have to worry about all the imports and other things that are going on, like France and others. So it's totally doable. It's just public opinion right here drives a lot of policies that don't make economic sense.
What other countries are using nuclear energy?
Well, France is the leader, but there's nuclear going on in many places all over the world. The other thing, when we decided to get out of the business, you knew who's been providing, not only providing uranium to us, but Russia has used that as a strategic way to build relationships with countries all over the world that didn't have oil and gas supplies. And so they said, we'll bring our nuclear scientists, we'll sell you the uranium, we'll come in and help you build a nuclear plant, we'll help you have a stable, clean grid. And they've used it as a tactic for diplomacy in a very smart way, and we've just been out of that game. Thank goodness for the U.S. Navy, because the U.S. Navy continues to build nuclear submarines that are powered, not just nuclear weapons, but nuclear engines. And we've got nuclear-powered ships in the Navy, and without the U.S. naval program, we would have lost all of our edge or knowledge around nuclear engineering.
Wow. Let's talk about education for a minute. We had breakfast, my wife and I did, with you and Catherine, and she went away with that saying, oh, they're such a nice couple, I love them so much. But you talked about how you've created kind of this philosophy of being choice ready for your schools. And I heard you at the debates talk about, your schools are innovation schools. And I see that, in Iowa, we have a problem with kids not wanting to enter technical school if we even have hardly any training, or the trades, definitely in construction. How have you changed that culture in your state, and what are your successes around that?
Well, with education, being local and funding being driven through state legislature for education, you run into a challenge sometimes called formulas, because we got a formula for K-12 and we got formulas for higher ed, And those two things kind of rolled along, and it's easy for the legislature to come back and let's increase it by X%, and the formula just flows through and everybody tweaks with the formula. Well, I'm holding, one and then the other. So we spend, like $11,000 per student on K-12. And then we've got, this formula for K-12, the middle piece, career and technical education, which needs to start in high school and could be the equivalent of getting a 1-year degree, a certificate degree, a 2-year degree, could be a transition to college. So I call it that middle piece, was always being underfunded because it didn't have its own formula to drive. So we were able, because we stayed open during COVID, we had a lot of ARPA dollars and other, dollars that came from the federal government. We drove a lot of those into trying to accelerate our whole CTE, career and technical. And then we have passed a bunch of stuff in our state where, again, because if career and technical, and again, you talked about your shop growing up before the show, but I mean, two people that were really influential in my life, Mr. Goff, Mr. Willett, two shop teachers I had in Arthur. Right. I mean, teach you all the practical things that you need to know, small engine repair, welding, tools and plastics, and all the things that we covered in those classes is so valuable. And some of the lessons I still remember, but those practical applications certainly have helped me my whole life. And we've got to just drive some of that, we've got to drive that back in. When we say in North Dakota on Choice Ready, we want our seniors to be ready to go to pass the military exam. People think that's like stepping over a string. No. There's so many high school seniors that don't have the physical conditioning, the academic grades, or the emotional stability to pass to get into the military. So that's one. If it's a choice they want to make, because you go into the military, guess what? They pay for your college. You go into the military, you're not going to be sitting around being part of the $1.6 trillion of student debt, because the military will pay for your education. So that's a path. That's a debt-free path if you want to serve our country. The other one is college. Hey, if you want to go to college, that's great, but we spent 50 years trying to design K-12 to drive all people to college, and not every kid benefits from college. Not every kid thrives in college. And turns out the jobs that we have open in America that pay really well, including the trades, electricians, plumbers, healthcare specialists, computer-aided design, software programming. These are things that you don't need a 4-year degree for. And it turns out then some of the competition against higher ed includes like a 16-week certificate program. You can go to a 16-week certificate program and learn all the latest tools around computer programming and get the same job as the kid that piled up the college debt and got the 4-year degree in computer science. So creating competition is good for education because it forces them to innovate, forces our colleges to innovate. But the whole point of education is to give our kids the best shot they have. And we've got to expose them to careers when they're in elementary school. Get them to the fire station. Get them to the airport. Let them sit in a cockpit when they're in 3rd or 4th grade, and then spark a thing which, hey, I want to be a pilot someday. Okay, well then in junior high, then you can start doing career exploration. Exploration, we used to think that career exploration was when you're a senior, we're going to have a job fair in the gym, and then the companies will come and save you the job. It's too late.
That's still happening.
Yeah, it's 8 years too late. You got to interest kids in, here's the whole, you could be anything you want. Show
and this is something that you're doing now in North Dakota.
Yes.
How do you do it for the rest of the nation?
Well, we've got a model and we've got a blueprint, and we've got kids in North Dakota that hey, with the career academies that we've had up and running for a while, we used a model of one out of Bismarck that was between a college, the K-12 system, those two together with career and technical centers. Kids in high school can go take classes. So I met some kids, it was October of what was their freshman year. So they've been like basically, quote, in college for 4 weeks. I'm like, how's it going? Well, I already got a job offer. Really? How much? Doing what? Oh, power plant management. How much? $72,000. What? Really? You're kidding? Yeah. College debt? No. What's going on? Well, I just put a down payment on a new Ford F-150 pickup. I'm like, how do you do that? Well, they're going to pay for my college. I took my first year of my coursework while I was in high school, so they got half their 2-year degree done in high school. The other half is there, and then they're going to do the fall semester. They got the job offer because in January they were going to start as an apprentice with 6 months more of sort of co-op work and finishing their school. So and they're done with their freshman year. They have a $72,000 job in a car, an F-450, no college debt, working for a company, a leading energy company that will pay for the rest of the college if they want to go back. I mean, I'm saying, okay, why we need to make sure that every kid knows that's a possibility, because they go, are you going to go to college? What's your major going to be? That's the we can have a better conversation with kids than that.
Yeah, and it's become this idea of college ready and global ready and everything else instead of really workforce ready.
Yes.
You know, we have kids graduating with $200,000 in debt that can't find a job in the field they were studying. So, and you've had success building technical schools, and is it funding is it allocated from the state? Is it how are you doing that?
Well, we created grant money. We had applications we said they have to be regional, got to have multiple school districts, shared resource. We're not big enough that all 175 school districts can have a career academy. So you guys get together, make a proposal, come in, and guess what else? You've got to have private sector support. You got to have matching dollars. You got to have the companies that are going to employ these kids say, we're going to put up hard dollars to help get the buildings built, and we're going to be there ready to hire the graduates when they come out. So again, whenever we can spend $1 of taxpayer money and double it immediately with a private sector match, wow, that is a strong signal that we're actually getting a return on investment for the taxpayer. And that's how we think. Not all spending is wasteful. If you can spend $1 and make 10, or spend $1 and save 10, which is how we think about it when we're treating taxpayers like customers, and actually doing the ROI on investing the taxpayer dollars the way you would your own if you're a business leader. We get great results, and these career academies and I'd say one other thing, when I'm talking to these kids, I say, tell me about the experience, whatever. They say, well, I didn't like sports. I wasn't going to be the homecoming king. I wasn't going to be the valedictorian. I probably would have dropped out by now because my crowd. But I came here to this regional career academy, and guess what? All the other kids I met were like me, and they were interested in this and working and solving problems with their hands and with their heads and doing this together. These are all my friends. I'm graduating now with honors. I probably wouldn't have graduated at all if I hadn't had this opportunity. So we're not just creating workers, we're changing lives and creating an opportunity for young men and young women to be moms and dads and build families and start families and do all that. And in North Dakota, we've got the second highest birth rate in the country right now, and I think part of it is because we are focusing on creating opportunities for people to stay there and build families.
That's awesome. Amazing. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the debates. So the first debate, you were injured, and I see you're still injured. You wheeled in here on your scooter. You called it Scooter One, right, or something like that. But one of your guys told me the story and said you injured yourself and you didn't take the pain meds. You weren't supposed to be standing on it. So you're standing at this podium trying to have a presidential debate. Just tell us about that. I mean, what was that like? Well, what happened?
Well, I was playing basketball,
okay.
Trying to play basketball my whole life. And I'm so grateful for my legs. I've never had a knee injury, never had an ankle injury, I've never one night even like iced an ankle or an Achilles my whole life, and boom, blew the whole thing. I mean, like ruptured it, tore it right off my calf.
Same day?
28 hours before the debate.
Okay.
So the next day, you go to the emergency room and they're like, yep, you blew your Achilles. See the Milwaukee Bucks team doctor. He's like, yep, you blew your Achilles. It's ruptured. It's gone. Nothing we can do now. Here's a bunch of prescription painkillers. Nope, not taking those. And then they said, can you get to the walkthrough? We had to get up a stage. So I had to try to, get up, climb some stairs, figure out to be able to walk out in front of 14.5 million people when you've got, basically it feels like someone, took a hatchet and hit you on the back of the calf and severed your, a tendon completely. Right. I mean, that's the way to think about it. Everybody saw Aaron Rodgers. If you saw the close-up shot of that where it was rippling down his sock, I mean, I couldn't even watch that because it was like, okay, I know what that felt like. When people come to these walkthroughs, they're like, they have questions. Yeah, where's my camera? Where should I look? Who's this? My only question was, is that podium bolted to the floor? Because I'm like, and they said, why is that? I said, because I'm going to be hanging on to it all night. And I said, everybody said, have a moment. I don't want my moment to be like when I knock my podium over and then they all go down like dominoes.
How much of your upbringing in North Dakota gave you the strength to do that? I mean, I look at the other candidates. I don't know that any one of them would have shown up after that.
Well, there was a legitimate question on whether I was going to be able to stand for 2 hours. because you're basically standing on one leg, which is not. Today I could do that because my right leg. Wow, if I was going to get into a one-legged kicking contest right now, I mean, because I've had no weight on my left leg for 6 weeks. My right leg's in great shape. It wasn't that night. Wasn't ready for the 2-hour stand on it. But a farmer legislator I know in North Dakota texted me that afternoon, and he's like, "Hey, sorry to hear about that." But then his next thing was, "Hey, I got a neighbor, who blew his thing, put a cast on, delivered 180 calves in a blizzard. So cowboy up and get out there." And I just thought, there's so many people that were counting on me, people that had donated, people that believed in what we were doing. Because like when we announced, I had high school classmates there and people from the first startup and fraternity brothers from college and people flying in from around Silicon Valley to New York, people that I'd worked with that were like, "Hey, we're behind you. We know who you are. We trust you, your integrity. We know what you can get done." And I'm like, I'm not letting those people down. And I thought about, we had just had this horrific thing in Fargo where a police officer was killed and others were injured by some of them that had lived, but they were shot multiple times by a guy that was intent on mass carnage. And so if not for the incredible work that they did, but I had just, spoken at the funeral of this fallen officer. It's the third time I've done that as governor, and something I hope I never have to do again, to speak at one of those services, and in hockey arena with 6,000 people and grieving parents. But and he was a member of the National Guard as well, so he'd served his country. He was starting when he was 18, became a police officer, and 3 months into it, he gets taken out by a guy that's got 1,800 rounds of ammo in his trunk and is ready to, ready to go on a mass spree. If not for them, everybody in the country might have heard about this, if not for this police officer. So there was a part of me that day too where I was like, wow, I can stand on one leg. Yeah, it hurts, but I've been shot 5 times, and those guys are, when I talked to those guys, they were asking, are my brothers in blue, how are they doing? They weren't asking about themselves. So I get inspired by the courage of law enforcement, military, everybody that does that, and this is I'm doing this whole thing. I'm running because out of a heart of service. So I didn't really ever think twice about it.
Yeah, it was admirable. I could see you standing there and just powering through it. And in the second debate, you really squeezed more time in. You got a little more competitive and more, probably recovered a little more. You're still on your little wheel thing, but
it was a world of difference.
Right, world of difference. Some weeks make, but you talk about gun violence, and I know that came up in that debate, and your response was, well, I believe, as I recall, was something about, the highest gun crime is in the cities with the most strict gun laws.
Yes.
And that it's, I think you mentioned that mental health was something we need to really work on. Can you explain that a little more, your philosophy around that?
Well, we've got a crisis in our country, and it's tied. Mental health and addiction are two things that co-occur. And if you go to if you look at the jails across the country, because everybody thinks, well, the problem is with gun violence, hey, just lock everybody up. Well, we've been locking people up. We've got like 2.5 million Americans locked up, and people say, build more, lock up more. And addiction's a brain disease. It changes the way people's brains work, and all the science out there is now. And if people think that is a moral failing or like a bad choice, or they're something like that, they think if you believe that, well then as a policymaker, then you'd say, well, we can fix that because we'll just make these consequences even harsher. We'll have minimum mandatories, longer sentences, bigger fines, lock people up longer. It hasn't stopped anybody. The war on drugs, I want to say the war on drugs that we've been fighting for 50 years, newsflash, fentanyl's winning. When the war on drugs started 50 years ago, we were losing 5,000 Americans, 10,000 Americans to overdoses. Even 5 years ago, it was like 20,000. Since Joe Biden's taken office, we've lost the equivalent of 5 Vietnams in the last 2.5 years. Like 260,000 Americans have died of overdoses, and
wow.
70% of those are fentanyl poisonings. So it's not an overdose in the sense because you could have been a user for 20 years and never overdosed, even on hard drugs. That happened in the 70s and 80s. But now you can be a kid. Like we met a kid on parents of a kid I think Catherine, First Lady of North, she's courageously shares her story. She's been in recovery for 21 years.
And that's one thing that really impressed my wife when she met your wife, was that she's really spearheaded a movement in North Dakota, and you guys have made a lot of progress in helping people with addiction.
Yeah, Catherine held her 7th annual Recovery Reinvented event yesterday. We had nearly 1,000 people that were there, several thousand watching online, broadcast into our criminal justice locations, corrections facilities. And we say, why would you do that? Well, 100% of the women and 80% of the men in most correctional facilities have a substance abuse disorder. I mean, they got there in part because they had a brain disease. And so you just think of our prisons as a big chunk of what we're doing is incarcerating people with a disease. And I mean, I don't think we would say, because if it's a disease it's chronic, it's progressive and ultimately fatal, just like diabetes, just like cancer. But the stigma around it is like, they got diabetes, they got cancer, they had, tough luck for them. Addiction, they made a bunch of bad choices. And we just have to understand, if we were treating this thing like a healthcare thing, that money that we're spending on corrections could be spent on because the other issue, homelessness, which is racking all of our large cities, homelessness is about 100% co-occurrence between addiction and mental health problems. And so it is like we just are, and we spend $4 trillion in the US on healthcare, and we spend almost nothing on mental health. And whether it's the shootings, the mass shooting, the homelessness, the degrading of our cities, it's like if we were approaching that as a health issue, and yeah, there are people that are truly violent that need to be locked up. Absolutely, that has to happen. And people that, commit crimes using guns, but some of the people we're locking up are nonviolent offenders that were just doing a property crime, trying to get either the money to buy their next hit. And that crime would have never happened if we were solving the underlying health problem.
And so how do you solve that as President of the United States?
Well, our reimbursements are all wrong. I mean, you can drive over any city in America, and you're going to see a brand new shiny hospital and a brand new shiny orthopedic wing, and you might see a children's wing, you might see whatever, but I've not seen here's the addiction and mental health wing sponsored by this donor and this whatever, or built with any taxpayer dollars, because if somebody's in treatment, they're probably in the basement, someplace on the edge of town. They're not at the bright shiny campus.
Well, and when we have medical facilities that mark up their services 1,000%,
yes,
and they're always building a new wing,
yep.
Why not a mental health wing?
Yeah, and one thing that does scale that we know is it turns out that one of the groups that is best able to help people in recovery and stay in recovery is people with lived experience. So now we have 1,000 peer support specialists in North Dakota. The vast majority of them have got lived experience, including criminal justice interaction, meaning AKA they're felons. And if you're a felon in our country, we say, we're a country that doesn't discriminate. Then go read our law. If you even had a nonviolent drug offense that was considered a felony, because we turned a bunch of misdemeanors into felonies to try to get people to stop using. So we have all these felons running around that have never done anything violent in their life. They've never threatened anybody else. They had an illness that led them to conduct a property crime. Well, we can discriminate against them on jobs. People can have a checkbox. Check here if you're a felon. You want to live in this building? No. Check here if you're a felon. No, you can't live here. So we can discriminate on housing, discriminate on employment. We tell them they can't vote. They can't carry a gun, even though they may have never held a gun or committed a crime with a gun. So we have all these built into our laws, the way to discriminate. Well, guess what happens to those people? They get marginalized, shoved to the side, they reoffend, they get back with the same groups, and then we end up back, spending $45,000 or $50,000 a year in North Dakota. That's one of the lowest. California, it's over 6 figures to house somebody in this California system. So the taxpayers get to pay for all of this, for the housing, the food, and the health care for someone who's incarcerated when they could be a constructive citizen. Well, now in North Dakota with a peer support program, they can get paid, and we pay them more. They'll work with like 5 or 6 clients that are coming out of the system, and if they help them find a job, find a place to live, and get a driver's license, we pay them more. So we've got incentives, And so we're actually creating and filling the void that we had in mental health care workers with people that have lived experience. All the data shows, large-scale tests, that those peer support specialists are as effective as a professional addiction counselor in helping someone stay clean and sober.
So, Governor Burgum, your team's telling me that your time's running out. We could talk all day. I know we could, and I'd love to schedule another interview with you.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're just a fascinating individual. I really appreciate you and what you're doing. So, if there's one message that you'd like to leave our listeners with, especially us Iowans, what would you say? What would it be?
Well, I just say I'm grateful for everyone in Iowa we've met, because this is a state that really takes things seriously. And we touched on the debates, but we're back fighting actually a historic battle, because there are people that are trying to take the power away from people in Iowa, people in New Hampshire, by saying that no, we're going to narrow the field based on national polling months before the vote ever starts in Iowa. That's not happened before. That's unprecedented. And they're trying to create a gate that says you can't be part of these debates. They keep trying to shove us to the side. We keep crossing the hurdle, and we keep making the thresholds going forward. But it's artificially trying to reduce the competition before the voters get to vote. And I'm a believer that as Theodore Roosevelt fought and helped create presidential primaries to get it out of the hands of a few party bosses and the media. And what do we have now? We got a couple people at the RNC, and you've got a network channel that has said these are the rules to be part of our debate. The voters decide who goes forward, and the voters in Iowa in particular, who listen to your program, Oliver, come to our events, ask penetrating questions, have the dialogue, invest the time to listen, like people are here. These are the people that get to decide. The people, power to the people, let the people rule. They're the ones who get to do it. It's not some network. And so, because again, the most frustrating question, that I have on the whole campaign, it's not about, can you lead? Do you understand the global economy? Can you help lead us out of this economic morass? What were your experiences in the private sector that actually mount up to more than everybody else on the stage, have created more jobs than everybody on the stage, made payroll longer than everybody else on the stage? The question I get is, are you going to make the debate stage? I mean, it's political theater. It's not really like a job interview to can you do the job of actually leading the country, which I know that I can because of the experience I have. And I also know the people that I'm standing on stage with. And when, the idea that we would put somebody in the White House again who doesn't have private sector experience, we've done that with Joe Biden. We did that with President Obama. We've seen how that's worked. Yeah. We don't need to make that mistake again. And we certainly don't need to put somebody in there that doesn't understand the far-ranging impacts of technology that are coming. And now we've got someone who's got small-town values with global experience, who understands how technology is changing every job, every company, every industry. I mean, it sounds like the man for the moment. And the last time we had a Western governor ride in, things worked out pretty well when Ronald Reagan showed up. And there's an opportunity for America to do that, and would love to have Iowa's support in making that happen. We need somebody from the Midwest, bring some Midwest common sense back to DC.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Oliver. Yeah.